Oil Spill Eater 2, OSE2, a non-toxic bioremediation oil spill cleanup agent, recently became a true success story for the environment, wildlife, and people of the Niger Delta region. The OSE2 remedy was used on a major oil spill that took place on November 27, 2013, at the AGIP Brass Terminal off the River State coast of Nigeria. This OSE2 spill cleanup demonstrates how oil companies can meet their governance policies, which generally state they will be good stewards of the environment while maximizing profits for the shareholders. The areas impacted were predominantly the Bayelsa Atlantic Ocean shoreline, as well as the river shorelines and creeks. Witnesses in Adiawama said that the waters along the Atlantic coastline were covered by a thick coat of oil, which compelled them to suspend fishing. Another follow-up visit on December 6th showed that Akpowama, Uwawama, and Odiawama communities and fishing camps in Brass were all impacted. AGIP, the responsible party for the spill, is a subsidiary of ENI of Italy, who formed a partnership with NNPC to establish NAOC. While determining the most appropriate cleanup plan for the spill, AGIP was notified by Environmental Rights Action and Friends of the Earth Nigeria, who decried the alleged use of dispersants in oil spill cleanup along the Atlantic coastline in Bayelsa, since dispersants are unsafe for human and aquatic life. AGIP officials and Geoli Global Resources Managing Director Mr. Leslie Mayol discussed the use of Oil Spill Eater 2, which Geoli Global Resources has used on a number of spills in Ogoniland previously. His company, Geoli Global Resources, performed a demonstration of OSE2's capabilities for the responsible party on Saturday, November 30th, 2013. Observing the rapid results, AGIP officials ordered OSE2 and contracted with Geoli Global to handle the cleanup. After an aerial and shoreline assessment of the impacted areas of the spill, Mr. Mayol called OSEI Corporation at 2 a.m. on November 31st, 2013 to get the freight costs to airship OSE2 to Nigeria. By Tuesday, December 2nd, 2013, UPS had picked up the drums of OSE2 readied for AGIP and NAOC in Nigeria. AGIP, NAOC, and Geoli Global developed a cleanup action plan, which included a testing and monitoring plan before application of OSE2, as well as after the application of OSE2. The testing plan was set up by coordinates. Samples were extracted from various areas, and the samples were shipped to a laboratory in the U.S. for analysis. Global Resources started application of OSE2 on December 4th, 2013, with existing stock of OSE2 drums already in Nigeria. Upon arrival of the air-shipped OSE-2 drums to Nigeria, they were transported immediately to the staging port and deployed onto the barge as well as shallow-bottom vessels for application onto the Nigerian Atlantic coast, mangroves, rivers, and creeks. There were numerous vessels set up to apply OSE-2 to the shorelines and mangroves that were staged along the shorelines. A large central barge was utilized to provide larger quantities of OSE-2. OSE-2 is mixed with non-polluted water from the nearby area of the spill, since it contains naturally occurring microbes that OSE-2 will enhance and grow to digest the oil spill to CO2 and water. Because OSE-2 contains no foreign microbes but instead supports the indigenous and local bacteria only, means that it poses no danger to the region's ecosystem by adding foreign microorganisms. The cleanup personnel in this video are performing sampling of the water prior to application of OSE-2. You can also see personnel extracting samples from various areas on the shoreline as well. Soil samples from the shorelines were taken from the water and the shoreline surface, as well as 1/3 of a meter below the surface, to ensure that the entire area of water and shoreline were addressed and remediated. There was considerable oil floating on the open water near the shorelines where OSE-2 was directly applied, and in minutes this oil was broken down and detoxified to the point it would no longer impact the environment.
On the body of water, moving all the shame on the water in Otioma, Bayelsa State. That's what's going on right now.
The cleanup also shows the effective use of booms to protect sensitive areas. OSE-2's ability to break down oil and cause it to float protects the 60% of marine species that live in the water column. This also keeps the oil on the surface while it is being converted to a safe endpoint of CO2 and water, which enables booms to keep oil out of the susceptible areas and prevents re-oiling of areas. Dispersants render booming operations useless since they sink oil under the booms. With OSE-2 and booms, you have a cooperative response system that ends up protecting the environment and reducing natural resource damages. OSE-2 was applied to shorelines and mangroves along the Nigerian Atlantic coast over 29 days. The action plan was followed until complete coverage of all the contaminated shorelines, mangroves, and open water had been accomplished. You can see the oil on the mangroves just before OSE-2 is applied on this stretch of shoreline that covers over 18 kilometers. OSE-2, when applied to water or soil, emulates Mother Nature's own process. However, OSE-2 speeds the process up to remediate the oil or fuel on the soil or in the water in a few days to weeks, instead of decades if the oil was left in place. When OSE-2 is applied, the biosurfactants attack the molecular structure of the oil, which in turn detoxifies the oil so it can be used as a food source for indigenous local bacteria. While the oil is broken down, numerous enzymes are forming protein binding sites to induce all bacteria to use the detoxified oil as a food source. During these two phases, the nutrients in OSE-2 rapidly colonize or grow microbes. Once the microbes run out of the OSE-2 nutrients, they convert over to the only food source left, the detoxified oil, and digest it to CO2 and water, permanently removing the spill from the environment, whether it be water, soil, or vegetation. There were areas where the oil had seeped into the soil. Therefore, the soil was turned or tilled to ensure all the oil was remediated from the shorelines. Agip and government regulators would press their boots into the soil to determine if oil would be pushed out onto the surface. If oil pushed out, the entire area was then tilled and OSE-2 applied. This cleanup also shows how safe OSE2 makes oil spill cleanup in regards to human contact. You can see responders walking in the shoreline soil and sand barefooted, where OSE2 had been applied. They suffered no adverse health effects, since there is nothing in OSE2 that would compromise human health. And OSE2 immediately begins breaking down the molecular structure of the oil, so it detoxifies and is rendered harmless to the environment and humans in a very short time. Community volunteers were utilized in this spill as well, and since OSE2 contains no harmful chemicals, these volunteers' health were never in jeopardy, as is the case when toxic dispersants are utilized. The spill was approximately 150,000 gallons, or 550,000 liters of oil, that contaminated open water, sensitive mangroves, river shoreline, as well as ocean shorelines. OSE2 was used in all these areas where over 26,000 hectares or 52,000 acres of shoreline and mangroves had become contaminated, completely eliminating natural resource damage with no compromising health to responders or marine species, and the fisheries were reopened rapidly. On January 12, 2014, a walkthrough of the cleaned up formerly contaminated areas was performed with AGIP, government officials, and GEOLI personnel. The government officials could not believe there had ever been a spill in the areas where OSE2 had been applied. AGIP and NAOC's use of OSE2 prevented natural resource damages in regards to marine species and wildlife, and prevented the destruction of sensitive mangroves as well as shorelines along with species that dwell there. Since OSE2 mitigated and removed the oil before it could create resource damages, AGIP was not fined and was not prosecuted for any natural resource damages. This saved AGIP potentially millions of dollars in costs. The temperature was warm, therefore in several of the shoreline areas and in the mangrove areas, fresh ocean water was added to the shoreline to ensure the soil remained moist to allow the conversion of the oil to a safe endpoint of CO2 and water to complete. Here you can see that the application of OSE2 onto the mangroves cleaned up the oil with no damage or distress to the mangroves. Mangroves are a protected species since they prevent erosion and support fish spawning. It is an amazing fact you can use OSE2 to prevent the death and destruction of mangroves on shorelines, allowing ecosystems to remain intact. This also prevents secondary natural resource destruction. The endpoint sampling showed the oil in the water had been remediated to 99.9% reduction, and the shoreline had been remediated to 97.9% reduction in less than 29 days for each, verifying OSE2 had cleaned up the water and shorelines associated with the spill.
From there down this way, when we got here, we discovered that the Chikoko soil has trapped in some particles of oil. So when we match, we see that oil is there. We have to apply tilling and spraying in order to further break it down. In progress on the cyst, started from increased left, then transferring left, down the shore where we saw oil patches coming out.
So you can tell me that this beautiful fish now was soaked with oil before?
Yes.
And the pictures exist that shows
we
that?
have pictures. We have pictures.
Oh, good. So everything looking bright and good here is after remediation, you know?
Yes.
AGIP, government officials, and GEOLI personnel on the shoreline worked hand in hand to return the spill-contaminated areas to pre-spill conditions. The man in the hat is a community representative and government official who was appraised of the OSE2 application and the rapid cleanup of the shorelines. The fishermen were able to return to harvest the fish from the oceans approximately 3 weeks after the spill started. Since toxic dispersants were not used and OSE2 causes broken down detoxified oil to float, the marine species were never adversely affected by the cleanup operations. The fact the marine species can merely swim away without being covered in sunken oil with dispersants or intake oil treated with chemical dispersants when it is dispersed and submerged in water column demonstrates once again that OSE2 is a safer, more effective methodology over dispersants, eliminating any concerns over contaminated seafood, and can replace these controversial chemicals as a response tool. The fact Agip had a major oil spill and greatly reduced natural resource damage due to the use of OSE2 is in stark contrast to previous spills globally where dispersants have been used. Major oil spills that have deployed dispersants have destroyed countless numbers of marine species, wildlife, and birds, have devastated industries that rely on harvesting marine species, compromised human health, and have left oil behind to linger in the environment for decades. In the case of this Niger Delta spill, when OSE2 was applied, it quickly broke down the molecular structure of the hydrocarbons, detoxifying the oil, immediately limiting the most concerning impact on the environment. It caused the oil to float when applied to the oil in the water, and caused the oil to lift to the surface off the shoreline soil and rocks. It reduced the adhesion properties of the oil, lifting it off the mangroves and separating the oil from the shoreline soils and rocks. Lastly, it reduced the smell and converted the oil to a safe endpoint of CO2 and water. Nothing to haul off, no secondary cleanup needed. The sites were internally closed out by Agip on January 12, 2014, deemed cleaned up, while the official closeout came up on January 17, 2014, after the visit of government regulators.
Initially, had so much of mangrove stain, vegetation in this area, and some crude oil trapped on the ground. With the help of OSEI, we've been able to biodegrade and clean up this area. And walk in and see.
The Gioli Global Services Company performed a professional cleanup while protecting the Nigerian environment and reduced cleanup cost. Oil Spill Eater 2 is the safe for responders, non-toxic to marine species product that permanently removes spills from the environment by converting spills to a safe endpoint of CO2 and water. And this video shows OSE2 doing just that, permanently removing oil from the environment.
That's what's going on right now. As it's coming, it's breaking up the ship. Mr. Lex? Yeah. What would this achieve?
All the shins.
It's going to break up all the shins?
Yeah.
Good. I can see all this color of tilling getting very brighter, better off, showing that this soil is here. Okay. Did you apply OSP Eater 2 here?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Anywhere we have tilled, we need to apply oil. And that to help us to break down the oil.
So there's no more oil here. I can see the water here clean.
You check the water, you see that it's clean.
The water is clean here.
The match.
So one can say here is free.
It's free.
Good. So no more hydrocarbon here. You have used OSP Eater
Yes.
to clean up this place.
Yeah, this place we did not have enough trickle, but we have shins, so we have to spray it without tilling.
Good. So here does not require tilling.
Yeah.
It's just spraying up OSP Eater.
Yeah.
I can see some crabs and you mean they survive in OSP Eater?
They survive in the area.
They worked?
Yeah.
They return back.
They are coming back.
Zoom them.
Normal area.
Oh my God, can you get those crabs really? Can you zoom it, look at their hands?
They are happy.
To show that they are yeah.
They are now.
That means OSP Eater non-toxic
Not toxic.
to any aquatic or crabs and human. Oh good. Pretty good. This water is very clean now. Was contaminated before, but they're pure clean. No sheen on this water. You can see the cloud. You can zoom them. So you spray all here with OSP heater everywhere in this environment?
Yes.
Good.
Even the overside.
Overside on the other side
Yeah,
too.
because we have
OSC2 emulates Mother Nature's own process while speeding it up to remove spills in the environment in a few days to weeks instead of decades. OSC2 is protecting those who cannot protect themselves.